following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. A's baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and one of the co-hosts is here. She's Nancy Finley. Jerry Feitelberg is on his way, and Nancy has a guest.
Yes.
Welcome,
Peterson.
Nancy. It's always nice to have you here. You're the girl, or the gal, or the woman. How about that?
Any is fine.
All right.
Yes. John wrote the book.
Yes.
Kansas City Athletics. At what year was that, John?
This is John Peterson.
Yes.
And,
yes, the book was written, go ahead. The book was written in 2003.
Okay, here's Jerry Feitelberg to join us in our harried production at the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, 420 Studios, which kind of explains a lot, good, bad, or indifferent. It's a nice day. John, what year was the book written?
2003. So about 15
wow.
years ago now.
So it was more fresh in your mind than things are today. Would be today if you wrote the book today. That's what I meant. What did you get from writing the book that you didn't think you'd get when you went into the project?
The reason I wrote the book is because there was no comprehensive history of the A's during the Kansas City years. Ernest Mill wrote a book in 1956, which was the second year the A's were in Kansas City, but nothing after that. And I found that a number of
that's a dirty word on this show, Ernest Mill. I hope I get a smile out of Nancy, if not an agreement. Yes, you're right. And one of the reasons that the Kansas City A's go so unwritten about was that I don't think they ever had a winning record, a winning year.
No, they didn't. The best year was 73 victories. They always lost more than they won, and they were there 13 years, so they have the distinction of being losingest team in baseball history, in modern baseball history.
Well, they had a lot of things going for it.
Right. We were building.
Towards the end of the Kansas City reign, Kansas City was accumulating an array of players that would go on to be the center of a 5-year run where they coupled 2 championship years with 3 World Series victories, 2 division, pennant winners and that sort of thing. 5 years in a row.
We went
really
like
terrific.
Yeah.
How frustrating, what I'd like to know, how frustrating it must have been for an A's fan who grew up worshiping whatever team you root for. You're a kid. And boom, they leave. All of a sudden they do great. You're left without a team, much like what happened to me with the New York Giants. I was a New York Giant fan. They upped and left, and all things considered, did pretty well on the West Coast. The irony is I lived the bulk of my life on the West Coast, so it wasn't all that bad from
How
that
were they
standpoint.
doing in New York when they
But there was a time when they left, and I was 10, when it was terrible. Was it the same as a Kansas City fan? Did they take it as seriously as New York took losing the Giants and the Dodgers?
I would say yes, and maybe even a degree more, because New York still had one team, the Yankees, although I realize that if you were a Giants fan or Dodger fan, you probably hated the Yankees. But
I know, but you'd go, or we as kids would go to Yankee Stadium root against them, yet worship them, the players, if not the organization. Hated the organization. Right. Hated that they could get a Bud Daly, for instance, from Kansas City. I think that was...
well, how about a Roger Maris?
Oh, yeah, Jerry Feitelberg. That was a steal. Was it, Jerry, were you the one that told me the story of they announced the trade of Roger Maris from Cleveland to Kansas City? And in the locker room, talk was, in the Yankee locker room, we just got Roger Maris.
I don't think I told you that story. That didn't come from me. But Ralph,
okay, but I don't know where it. I don't remember where it came. Might have been Peter Goldenbach.
Might have been the Roger Maris book.
Could have been.
It might have been in the Roger Maris book, actually. And
Ralph, did you
I want to ask.
In Brooklyn? Did you not grow up in Brooklyn?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I grew up in Queens, but I have roots in every borough in that city. My grandparents in the Bronx, cousins in Brooklyn.
Were your cousins Dodgers fans?
My cousins were Dodger fans. As a matter of fact, my grandfather's sister, my great aunt Sonny, lived on Bedford Avenue, right across the street from Ebbets Field. Wow. And my first year of going to games with my grandfather, I was a little kid. He took me to all three stadiums. He took me to the Polo Grounds, and that was it for me. I mean, that was unbelievable. It was before they brought up Willie, and then he took me back after they brought up Willie and showed me how the different players realigned. Bobby Thompson went to third, the other thing. And then he took me to Yankee Stadium, and he pointed out that it was Joe DiMaggio's last year. Even Joe didn't know he was a future Oakland A's coach at that time. But he was playing it out.
Yeah.
In 51, it was his last year. My grandfather said, be sure you remember this. It's Joe DiMaggio. You got to see him play. And I do, and I'm grateful for that. Then he took me to see my Aunt Sonny's apartment. My great Aunt Sonny, but who knew? And I thought that was, Ebbets Field was special itself. It was so intimate compared to the other ballparks that you felt like you were in your neighborhood, and you were in the neighborhood. So, that was my introduction to it all. And so you can imagine me losing them, and what you say, John, about Kansas City kids that lost their team, they didn't have a team for a while. How long did it take to get they left in 68? Well, I guess 69. That forced expansion with the Royals, didn't it?
Yes, they did. And it was actually premature in terms of Seattle. They were not really ready for a team at that point, but Kansas City was. And fortunately, had a good owner, Ewing Kauffman, who put a lot of money in the team. And, by 1976, they won the Western Division. But it was tough the first few years, especially when Kansas City saw those grade 8 teams and realized that team could have been playing in Kansas City.
We surprised
Absolutely.
ourselves.
Absolutely. Nancy, what are your memories of Roger Maris?
Oh, you know what? I was too little. I remember hearing the name, but I can't really say I would know him. He would probably know me running around. in between
Right.
people, you know.
Okay.
But I remember the name a lot and hearing how much he hated leaving Kansas City.
Yeah, absolutely. He was not a New York kind of person, much like Nolan Ryan and a number of players. Just they don't like the combination of the city itself, the knowledgeable, unforgiving fans, you might say, because they do know so much that you can't blow things by them. You can't not hustle. And you know, the country people, baseball. A lot of baseball players. Roger Maris grew up in Fargo, North Dakota. That wasn't it with him. He was just a Midwestern kind of person at heart, and
the weather maybe.
You can take New York any way you want, but it's not going to change. The city is not going to change for the player.
And what hurt Roger Maris, I think, was the fact that he was chasing Babe Ruth for the home run record. And so was Mickey Mantle. Those two were neck and neck. And Mickey was a favorite in New York, and Roger was not. And there was, particularly a lot of sportscasters got on Roger. They did not want him to break Babe Ruth's record.
That's true.
But Frick didn't want him to do it either. He was the commissioner of baseball at the time.
Right.
And he insisted on the asterisk being put in the record book that Maris did 61 homers in 162 games, while Babe Ruth only had 154 to do it.
Oh, my.
Right.
You know, Ford Frick was Babe Ruth's ghostwriter.
Yeah.
Believe me, that happens to be true. And he, as Jerry said, he was dead set against it. That asterisk never actually got into the record books.
There's no good reason for that.
Of course.
Oh.
Of course. You know, things change. Scheduling changes. You'd have to have an asterisk by every record today, because in today's game of baseball, there's an unbalanced schedule.
Right.
Even within the division, the A's and Houston, for instance, are not playing each other's opponents the same amount of games against each other's opponents. I think you know what I mean, but there's an unbalanced schedule. So that added a few more games to it. But you know what? He legitimately broke that record. There was
sure
no
did.
Oh, he did.
Sure did. You know, the A's and Astros play 19 times. They play 19 games in the division, and then they only play 6 or 7 games with the Yankees, Red Sox, Baltimore teams. They just don't play a lot of games, and you know, that's why when trying to handicap the playoffs is very difficult, because you have teams like, say, in the Eastern Division knocking each other off, and then they play the Astros, which had a fairly easy route to the playoffs. It's hard to say who's going to win, but of course we know that the Astros did it last year. But you just never know.
Hey, John, excuse me, Jerry. Let me ask John 1 or 2 questions while they're on my mind, because my mind is so fleeting. One of them was Joe DeMaestri, just passed away a few years ago.
Yeah.
Rest his soul. He gave me a terrific interview in 1995 about those days and his career with both the A's and the Yankees. He was the last shortstop with the A's, if I'm not mistaken, with the Kansas City A's, if I'm not mistaken, or the last one to play in Philadelphia. And Joe DeMaestri had something going for him along those lines, and very articulate, nice guy. In doing your book, did you get to talk to him or talk about him?
I didn't talk to him, but I have sure read a lot about him. And you're right. He was the last shortstop in Philadelphia and the first one in Kansas City. Great fielder, moderate hitter, but the trouble Kansas City had those first couple of years, they did not have a lot of talent. Very limited talent came from Philadelphia. So he was one of the stars of the team.
Yes, and they were crippled by the fact that Connie Mack was basically going out of business, both literally and figuratively.
I figure John would know more about that part too.
Yeah, John.
Yes.
If you would.
Yeah, that's very much
that transfer of the A's from Philadelphia to Kansas City and how they came in really crippled.
Yeah, the team was basically bankrupt in Philadelphia, and they had to get out of there. There was probably no way they could have survived in Philadelphia without a big infusion of a lot of money, and I don't think anybody was going to do that.
And
actually, Charlie Finley was one of the people who was interested in buying the A's at that point, or at least being a major investor. And from what I read, one of his goals in Philadelphia for a year and then moved the team to Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Wow.
Thank goodness that didn't happen.
Wow. I had no idea about that. Nancy, were you aware of that before talking to John?
I heard the rumors, but I just don't think he was ready at all then. I'm just glad that didn't happen. Things would have worked out differently. Who knows?
Right.
I also have a question, Ralph. We talked about this last week, and I forgot why the Yankees were opposed to the A's staying in Philadelphia. They wanted them out, but I forgot why. What was the reason?
I don't know what the reason was. Is something to do with they were in more of a close proximity to New York?
Yeah,
perhaps
90 miles.
Yeah, I don't remember that offhand. But
I don't know if that was as much of a fact. There were some major reasons why the Yankees wanted the A's to go to Kansas City. One of them was that Arnold Johnson, the person that purchased the A's, had very close business relationship with the Yankees. In fact, he had purchased Yankee Stadium back in 1953, and part of that transaction included the minor league ballpark in Kansas City. Kansas City was the Yankees farm team, and that was for $650,000. He bought a ballpark, which would have been worthless because Kansas City was talking about building a new ballpark. So part of the transaction was that if the A's moved to Kansas City, the city would buy the ballpark back from Johnson, and Bill Webb, who owned the Yankees, would construct a new ballpark. Well, or I shouldn't say new ballpark, would rebuild the old Blue Stadium to become Municipal Stadium in Kansas City by adding an upper deck. So it's kind of a win-win situation for the Yankees. He also moved the AAA team to Denver and got about $78,000 out of that transaction. So they made money on the deal by the team moving to Kansas City.
And Johnson
and
stadium, didn't he? Very quickly.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Nancy.
Go ahead. Nancy,
Johnson,
would you repeat the question?
Oh, well, I heard Johnson built this Kansas City stadium in like 90 days.
Yeah, it was actually Bill Webb was part of the construction crew of that. And it was about it's called a 90-day miracle in Kansas City because the approval was not made until like mid-December. So the whole stadium was basically, they had to tear off the roof of the old stadium and then add the upper deck. So they couldn't even start construction until the upper deck or the roof was torn off. So it was basically January, February, and March. The whole stadium was built during a harsh winter. And imagine that, building a stadium basically within 90 days today.
Hey, it was going to take 6 years to build the stadium downtown here, and we don't have a harsh winter.
I know. Maybe a little rain, and
Yeah, every now and again, and that only comes once every 3 or 5 years. So, wow, times
but
they are
Kansas City
changing.
was very hungry for a team. They were a minor league city. They did not have any major league teams, and this was their chance to.
Yeah, they had a parade to celebrate.
Yeah, a huge celebration because it was their welcome to the major league. Remember, there were only 16 major league teams in those days, and Chicago had 2 of those. So Kansas City was basically joining 15 other cities to be a major league city.
But in retrospect, the new Kansas City team remained a farm team for the Yankees.
Really?
Yes. When the A's moved to Kansas City, there were a terrible amount of trades between those 2 teams.
Not the Royals.
So with that in mind, and I have it in my head, who are the only 2 players traded from the Yankees to the A's that really helped the A's? In my estimate, might have been a couple of, might have been Bobby Shantz, might have helped them going back and forth, Enos Slaughter, but there were two that really were an example of the great Yankee depth. And
would one be? What about Billy Martin?
Billy didn't help him that much. I would say
but Jerry Lumpy and Norm Seaburn helped them an immense amount. They started to become decent right about that time. Am I correct?
Yeah.
And also add Bob Cerv to that. Bob Cerv, had he had the home run record in Kansas City until it was broken this year by Mike Moustakas.
Whoa. Now, do they blend the Kansas City records with the Kansas City A's and the Royals record together? I have so many different podcasts, different regions, Minnesota, how do they handle the old Washington Senators records, and then you have Washington with Montreal and the expansion Washington. How do they view it, Kansas City?
It's totally separate. The only reason that Bob Cerv's name would keep coming up is because Kauffman Stadium is so immense that it's not a home run park. And, if somebody hits 30 home runs a year, it's a good season. So
they just used it as an example. This was the first person in Kansas. They weren't putting it in the Kansas City A's record book, for instance. Okay, that's good that they weren't. That preserves what the A's did. The A's and the Oakland A's, Kansas City, and that's one big franchise. It's taken me a long time to come to terms with that, with the San Francisco Giants. They're really one big franchise with the New York Giants. And
did they do well before they moved?
I struggle with that.
Okay. I mean, I'm just wondering if the A's were similar to them, or were the Giants doing well in New York before their move?
Well,
we can talk about the move of the Giants and Dodgers until we're all blue in the face, believe me. And we will on some podcasts. We need you. It all started with Jerry's Boston Braves, if you want to know the truth.
That's
right. Am I right?
Yeah, 1952. They left Boston in the spring of 1953 for Milwaukee. That started. It was the first franchise shift in the National League in 75 years, something like that. It was just
actually the first major league team to move in 50 years. The last one was actually Baltimore moving to New York to become the Yankees.
Right. Yeah, that was in 1901 or 3, something.
Yeah,
like
1901.
Now, where did the Browns moving to Baltimore fit in chronologically?
The Browns, their records, all the Cleveland Browns records stay with the Cleveland Browns. The Baltimore Ravens.
Well, no, St. Louis.
I'm talking about the St. Louis Browns baseball team.
St. Louis Browns. They moved after the 53 season.
After 53, Braves moved after 52. Was that it?
52
right.
was the last year.
Okay, gotcha.
Baltimore, 53. What's interesting is Bill Vick owned the St. Louis Browns, and he really wanted to move to Milwaukee, but the Braves beat him to it. So then the Browns moved to Baltimore the following year.
Yeah. The Braves beat him to it because Perini's money beat him to it. Vick, as innovative as he always, I can't pronounce it, I ought to be in radio. As great as he was, Vick was always running his teams on a shoestring and borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, where Perini had this construction business, and he was making buco bucks, and he had some foresight, and Jerry can tell us more about that move.
Well, I was just a kid when that happened, and it just was very disappointing to a lot of kids that followed the Braves. As you know, they were the second team in Boston. Even though they started 25 years before the Red Sox, they just had a terrible record. They went 34 years without a pennant from 1914 to 1948. In 48, I think they drew 1 million people for the first time in their history. And then by 1952, the attendance had dropped down to about 280,000 people for 77 games, which is not very good. And Perini was losing money, and he saw an opportunity to go to Milwaukee, and it came up real quickly in the spring of 53. County Stadium was ready for them, and he just moved the team just like that. And a lot of hearts were broken, but, that's what happens when a franchise leaves.
May I ask how old you were at that time, Jerry? Not to date you. We're all dated.
13 or 14, something like that.
So that had to be tough. Were you a Brave fan or a Red Sox fan?
I preferred the Braves, but the only reason I went to more Braves games is because I could get in. And Fenway Park was about 32,000 people in those days. And the Red Sox were winning, and you had to know someone to get a ticket to get into the Fenway Park. So Braves Field was certainly much more accessible. And what's really interesting about the two teams were only about a mile apart, the two stadiums. Just you go to Kenmore Square, and you go about a mile up Commonwealth Avenue, and there it was. They had no trouble. There was no such things as territorial rights like the Giants like to say. They competed against each other, but they had their own fan base. And no one really complained that the other one, when one team was on the road, the other team would be at home. So it wasn't a problem. And
much like in New York, we all
just like in New York,
we had the natural rivalries going.
Did they have
what strikes me about the Braves, my earliest memory was dark and stanky being Giants, the double play combination of 51. But that came from the Braves.
That was in 1951.
What was the first Coliseum with a cover? I'm just wondering if they ever needed covers in Minneapolis, Seattle, in the
Well, the first dome, first dome stadium was the Astrodome, 1964.
Really?
In Houston.
Because they played football there too?
Yeah, both.
Yeah,
football and baseball.
Okay. Well, the weather too. That makes sense. I would think that would be in the north, Seattle.
Well, it gets awfully hot and humid in Houston, too, so that's the big reason down there.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, because...
there's a shortage of a lot of things in Houston going on right now.
Yeah.
Jerry, it would be Seichel. I think that's most of what's going on in Houston, a lack thereof. But by the same token... Jerry, can you give us a quick update on the current Oakland A's stadium, quest to get a stadium in Oakland, so we don't have to be on the move yet again? I don't think there's a franchise that's moved 4 times.
Well, here we go, Ralph. As you know, last year Dave Kappel came out and said that they were going to build a stadium at Laney College. They had, and it looked like they had all their ducks in a row, but they didn't. And then, the faculty and the students said no, it was just too intrusive on their way of life at the school. it'd be inappropriate to have it there, and they prevailed. And so that got put on the back burner. I think they're still negotiating, but I haven't heard anything. The second choice was Howard Terminal, which is not too far from Jack London Square. The problem there is getting people from the 12th Street or West Oakland BART stations over to Howard Terminal. And BART...
Can't you have trams and stuff? Can't you have these little buses that keep loading people up, like at the airport?
Sure,
to get your car?
They could either have trams or have either buses, or they could build a streetcar line and run tracks from downtown Oakland or from West Oakland Station over to the ball game. So they'd have to work on that. The mayor of the city of Oakland, Libby Schaaf, that's her preference, is Howard Terminal. But both are up in the air right now. And the third option is where the A's are playing now, the Coliseum. And they could do as the Yankees did in New York City, and as the Mets did, and as other teams have done in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. They build the stadiums and then rip down the old one. And it was essentially the same location. They did that in St. Louis too.
What does ownership prefer?
Well, from what we understand, they preferred the Laney College site.
The water,
so
or on the water.
It's on the water, and it has a little entryway from the bay there.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, if they can't have that, are they prone to stepping out and saying, "Hey, I will either sell or," because I know they don't want to build a marketplace at the current site in Oakland. They have no desire to put in hotels and restaurants, none of that. And it's not accessible by foot. So it's not going to build up a neighborhood. I think what you say, you put trams in, you put tracks in, you have a little shuttle. It would be idyllic to have the stadium at the waterfront where driving can be discouraged, getting in and out, and it would overlook the gem that's across the bay in San Francisco. Two gems looking at each other.
He agrees.
What a
county
dream.
and city should be ecstatic over this. Just
and it's not far from Jack London Square, where there's plenty of restaurants. There's plenty to do.
And they need rejuvenation in downtown Oakland.
Sure.
Jack London Square, quite frankly, is dying.
It's been dropping. Business has been dropping off there for years. And you're right.
Imagine what a ballpark would do.
Oh.
You put restaurants in around there. What it's done to every city. I could name them: Pittsburgh, Colorado, Philadelphia. They're all have stadiums in downtown areas. You know it with Boston.
Sure.
With
Fenway Park is great. But you don't have to go. You don't have to go cross country to Pittsburgh or any of these things. Just go to San Francisco. Look what AT&T Park did for that whole area. They built a Mission Bay starts there, and the Warriors are going close by. They got restaurants. They got places to go before and after the game. It's really, and this public transportation is wonderful there.
They
it drops you right off at the front door.
Yes, this is their chance.
Yeah. So the problem that they have to solve, and it is soluble, is to get transportation from either West Oakland or from 12th Street to get the people over there, and they can do that.
Well, it isn't let me say you're right about everything about AT&T Park, but it's not perfect traffic-wise.
It's difficult.
There always will be a backlog because of the way the city is and the populace and people commuting back and forth over the bridge.
One thing Oakland has had, San Francisco has not had, where they are access to the airport. I love just going down Hakenberger in 5 minutes. You're at the airport.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody talks about that, Nancy, but that is a great point.
I remember
access to the airport.
God. taking people to the airport from the Coliseum, it's nothing. When I learned to drive, I would do that. I mean, it's so easy compared to San Francisco.
But the major league clubs and the American League clubs don't stay in Oakland. They stay in San Francisco at the Park 55.
Yeah. Hey, also, Nancy, in today's day and age, it's 2 exits, but it's 40 minutes. So, because everything in the Bay Area is backed up with traffic and congestion. Horrible city planning, trams, buses, public transportation. It's all been, it's all gone to naught, really. Although they are thinking of putting in another tunnel for BART between Oakland and between the East Bay and San Francisco. So
they also need a good place to eat right now around that Coliseum.
Again, you're absolutely right. They have something pretty clever. They have outside vendors coming in, food trucks and what have you, that make for some interesting chowing down, if that's what you like to do at the ballpark.
You remember Francesco's?
Pardon me?
Remember
Francesco's?
Oh, yes. Oh, what a great Italian restaurant that was.
And then the Hyatt Hotel. That's where our players stayed in the visiting team. That's where I had the Chuck Tanner incident. But that's where everyone stayed.
Okay.
The Hyatt.
Our press.
We won't pursue that.
But it was there. It was right across the freeway.
My friends are going to go, how come you didn't pursue that? What are you, if not a pursuer?
Well, you all know that, just to put it in perspective. It was close.
Put everything into perspective.
Yes.
The way things are in today's day and age, it was almost like Uncle Chuck.
Back in those days when Charlie Finley owned the club, Al Davis used to hang out at one of the restaurants up on Hegenberger.
Yeah, the Edgewater, the coffee shop.
Whatever it was. They bring in a telephone. He had a little booth. And, we were at the restaurant one night and he came in and one of the guys had met him before. And then after our meeting, we spent about a half hour talking to him. And this was just before we moved the club, the Raiders to L.A. But,
Hey, I'll tell you who was interesting to talk to in those days was Run Run. Did you know Run Run?
Run Run? No.
He was Al Davis's assistant. He was kind of the old water bucket guy, and he'd serve Al Davis and drive by. He'd drive him by, run into the store and whatever. Thought maybe you might have known him from the old days. Back to you a little, John. Is there anything about your book that we should know? How to get it? How about that? Wick?
Well, you can get it on Amazon. I know McFarlane, the publisher, still sells it, and I would recommend it. It's a great book.
Good. Now, if people wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do it? Because you're an interesting guy, and I'm including myself if we want you back. It'd be terrific if you would come back from time to time.
Well, I would love to do it. They could just email me. It's jpeters, Peters, at Radix, RADIKS.net.
Beautiful. That's terrific.
Ralph, I don't have a pen, so send me a message on Facebook with the address so I can look at it.
I will send you a link to the show, and you'll have it for posterity.
And I can always forward it if you need me to.
And Nancy can always forward it. And I'll send you a link to that.
John, do you belong to SABRE, the Society for American Baseball Research?
No, I don't. I've been thinking about doing that a number of times, but just never have done it.
Because they publish books I joined last year, and I've got about 8 or 10 ebooks that they put out there, and
I had a chapter.
Good
I have a chapter in the one on the A's 3 years, but I have to say I didn't recognize a lot of the names, but I realized those are members who wrote about their favorite player.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was one on me. You don't see a woman in there too often, but someone sent me the book. But I spoke to that group here, and what's refreshing is, like John, though, they know about the history. You mentioned something, they know about it. And
you know, off the top of my head, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. You mentioned the name Enos Slaughter. Can you give me something that we may not know as outsiders about Enos Slaughter?
Not really. By the time he was at Kansas City, he was way at the end of his career. You know, one thing Arnold Johnson did was try to build up the team a little bit, and he had a good year in Kansas City, but he was way at the end of his career at that time, and I think maybe he played another year after that.
They traded him back to the Yankees, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
I think that was
he didn't do much.
Yeah.
But you know, one other trivia thing Jerry might appreciate, the scoreboard from Braves Field actually became the scoreboard at Kansas City's Municipal Stadium.
Oh,
it's a fairly new scoreboard.
I remember the scoreboard quite well.
It was only a couple of years old, I think, at that point, and
I think
Kansas City needed a scoreboard, and they bought it from Braves Field.
I think it was built around 1949 or 50. It was fairly new at Braves Field, and it was one.
And I remember a waterfall with a beer ad on it. That was really high tech.
And one unique thing about that scoreboard, it listed strikes before balls. You know, every other scoreboard always lists balls, strikes, and then outs.
Oh.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah,
and underneath is a sign, support dyslexia. Nevertheless, thank you both. All three of you, Nancy,
sure.
Jerry.
John's
my pleasure.
My go-to man for Kansas City. If I have blanks, John's my go-to person.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm. Come back and visit with us, please, John.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for listening, everybody. If you enjoy any of our offerings on the network or this one or this show, please box up some lightly used children's books and take them to the local Head Start program wherever you live. Kids need to read. They need to become school ready. They need to have their imagination tested, and they need to get their noses out of the computers and the devices. So if you do that, it would be much appreciated. I thank you for listening, everybody, and I thank our guest and co-host and hostess. Thank you, everybody. Be well.
Thank you, Ralph.
Bye now.
Adios.
Bye.
Okay.